University of Houston. Grayson Grundhoefer joins us, 365 Sports Recruiting Analyst. All right, Grayson, I know that there are junior days and weekends and all of that continues. Let's start, though, with the portal. I know that it's closed, and yet again, I don't know if it's ever closed. Has Baylor taken, at least for now until the next time period, their last transfer player for this particular semester?
It certainly feels that way, and obviously you have two different cycles kind of going on here, right? Because you got this one that is technically you could still add guys. I mean, I think Alabama still has this open 30-day window, and there's other schools kind of like that, and obviously more dominoes to fall with who knows what happens with Michigan and just all these different, circumstances that could change things. But I think in general for Baylor, if they're going to take someone, it's going to be just a complete difference maker, stud, and likely an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman, maybe a receiver. But again, it would fall into the you can't not take a prospect category. But right now, the expectation is that they're pretty much done for this cycle. And that would be, they have a solid group. They got 9 transfers committed, signed. Most are already on campus. Also added 2 JUCO prospects as well, so you get some age there added to the roster. And so, I think right now you can pretty much pencil that in for they're pretty much done unless there's something, some sort of moving part that happens. As we know, the transfer portal is pretty crazy. But then you mentioned the fact that, but then the next cycle. And I think sometimes people are kind of like, okay, what's the next cycle? But that would come essentially in the summer. But it truly is kind of after spring football where guys figure out where they are on their respective depth charts, how much they're going to play this year, get an idea of kind of what their role is going to be. You could see more attrition on the Baylor roster, and you're going to see more attrition from rosters across the country, which could open up some more spots for Baylor and allow them to take more transfers. But I do think they will probably add some prospects during that cycle. The question really is how many. And obviously, if you look back to this past year, they didn't really have a ton of success with the guys that they landed during that specific cycle outside of Byron Vaughn, who was kind of up and down, but he was the most productive of the 3 that initially signed. And so, it's a risk, but I do think that if you read and kind of listen to everyone's perspective going into that spring cycle, a lot of people think that it's going to be pretty crazy and that there's going to be a lot more guys in the portal that cycle than there ever has been in the past. And if this fall kind of winter cycle is any indication of that, I feel like that's probably going to be pretty accurate.
Grayson, Junior Day is on Sunday this week, a big day for recruiting for everybody around the country. But there are a ton of guys coming. If you had, and I'm going to put you on the spot, you can only pick one that's definitely coming to Baylor, which would be the one that you would pick?
Am I allowed to pick commits?
No, that's not. Yeah, you can't pick the commits. They've already said yes.
Okay. Yeah, so obviously the 5 commits in the 2025 class are going to be at Baylor. So if I'm not picking those, one of those 5, it really is an interesting kind of conundrum because you got a lot of guys that have visited a ton. And so naturally you kind of think, okay, well, it's probably going to be one of those guys. But then Baylor sent out a ton of offers recently. And so I think that's kind of clouded that a little bit. But I think if I were to pick one, just looking at who's on the list, who I've talked to, the kind of relationships that they've built, I'm actually going to go with a guy who I saw maybe 2 weeks ago, Iowa Colony edge Christopher Johnson. He's got a great relationship with the staff, specifically Caleb Collins. I know Caleb Collins and Dennis Johnson have been fighting over, is he going to play Jack? Is he going to play defensive end? We'll see on all that. But I do think that Baylor's in a great spot with him. I think he's a really, really good prospect. Currently a very underrated prospect who had a great day when I saw him at the Next Level Athlete camp just a few weeks ago. To me, he's very firmly a high 3-star type prospect and a guy that you would definitely be excited about to have on your roster. I think he had like 9.5 sacks last year, was one of the top defensive linemen in his district. I believe he might have won defensive MVP in his district as well. So very good prospect and one that I feel very good about Baylor's chances currently.
Grayson, has there been any noticeable differences in just things you hear, the way they approach who they're recruiting as compared to maybe the last few years? I just ask that because there are a lot of new faces, and you've been around long enough to see how various staffs do it to varying degrees of success. Is there anything notably different, or is it kind of just the same thing, new faces?
I gotta say, and this might be wrong, honestly, but just the way that I have looked at it, I mean, I've been covering the recruiting beat for Baylor since 2018. So, I mean, I've seen a lot of different kind of junior day lists. I've seen a lot of different, strategies when it comes to recruiting. But I do think that it's very important to mention Khenon Hall when we're talking about kind of what this junior day looks like, because if you look through this group and you look how many guys are from the Dallas area and from, Red Oak or from different, places kind of up along I-35. And you're kind of just like, hey, there's a lot of different guys coming, a lot of guys who I don't know if they would have come on a Baylor visit if he wasn't on the staff now. And I think that's been something really intriguing. Obviously, 2 SMU commits are going to be on campus this weekend. Demetrius Brisbane and, of course, Ricky Stewart, both out of Chapel Hill, both guys that Khenon Hall recruited to SMU. But even more than that, I mean, Cameron Morgan, the edge prospect out of Red Oak, I mean, that's a top 100 prospect in the country, an elite edge type guy who, I mean, again, I don't know if he would have visited Baylor if Khenon Hall wasn't on the staff. And there's other guys like that as well, the South Oak Cliff guys. I know Baylor's been really strategic as far as showing up at South Oak Cliff. Dave Aranda was there. Khenon Hall's been there multiple times during when they were traveling. So that area, obviously a lot of good players there, and so they're recruiting that heavily. So I think that's one of them. I do think, the shifts in NIL, I think the shifts in recruiting philosophy, especially with the fact that this class, they have a lot more space in this class than they did the last one. I think it's going to cause them to utilize that a lot more and potentially have, they might even go over 20 prospects in this class, which certainly was not even close to being realistic in the last class. And because of that, it gives you a lot more freedom to go out, recruit guys, take commitments early. You can also wait for some of your high priority guys late in the cycle as well. So I think that a lot of those type of things, I think, has made this junior day a very special one for Baylor, and one that, if they can capitalize on it, it could be huge things to this 2025 recruiting class.
Grayson, you wrote about the schedule in the premium section, and I found it pretty interesting the way you kind of broke it down about what they need. I do think it's pretty a good point at number one, that having 2 home games in November would be huge for this team, especially if they can get right at home this year and not have to travel that late, because I do think the last 2 years it's not helped them at all.
Right. I mean, 5-10 in the month of November since Dave Aranda arrived in Waco, and that includes a current 7-game losing streak during that month. And that's just brutal, guys. I mean, that's the time where you're supposed to be competing for a Big 12 championship, where you're supposed to be finishing the season, on a high note, right, where you're improving and getting better. And that simply just has not been the reality the last 2 years. And so, yeah, I mean, the schedule comes out on the 30th, I believe, is what Max Olson reported. So I kind of just went with the mindset of, it would be great if Baylor could find a way to have at least 2 home games during that month, just to give them more opportunities to not just win games, but win games as the season is coming to an end, and also making sure that the schedule isn't too brutal during that month. But yeah, it was pretty fun to do that. Obviously, we're going to know the real schedule in a week, but I kind of made up my own created one, the most ideal schedule. And obviously, you mentioned one of the criteria, and there's a few other ones in there if you want to give that a read. But yeah, I felt like it was a lot of fun, and also something that is completely made up and probably won't happen at all.
Go to Sikkim365.com to become a premium subscriber. We would appreciate that. That's part of the umbrella of what we do with 365 Sports. Grayson, thank you. Have a great weekend. Continued luck chasing all that down when it comes to National Signing Day, of course, next week with the stud. What? Oh, and also the transfer portal, which never seems to stop churning. When we come back,